I'm Olivia Parker, 32, founder of Phoenix Innovations. When my father's funeral began at St. Mary's Cathedral, I thought maybe they'd finally respect my choices. Despite building a multi-million-dollar sustainable energy company, I've always been the family disappointment, especially to my sister Rebecca. At the service, they placed me in the back row while they sat front and center. "The back is where failures belong," Rebecca whispered as she passed. Little did they know the family lawyer was about to read a will that would change everything. Sometimes life waits for the perfect moment to reveal who truly mattered all along. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I grew up in Maple Ridge, a pristine suburb outside of Seattle, where success had a very specific definition. In our community, you measured achievement through prestigious universities, traditional career paths, and the kind of house you owned on the right side of town. My father, Richard Parker, wasn't just a corporate attorney. He was the corporate attorney at Westridge Partners, representing tech giants and industry leaders across the Pacific Northwest. His definition of success was narrowly defined: Stanford or an Ivy League education, a career in law, medicine, or finance, membership at the Maple Ridge Country Club, and a sprawling Tudor home in the Oakwood neighborhood. My mother, Eleanor, played her part flawlessly, the supportive attorney's wife who chaired charity foundations and organized fundraising galas with military precision. She was kind in her way, but perpetually deferential to my father. When conflicts arose, she smoothed things over, rather than addressing what was actually wrong, preserving harmony at the cost of honesty. Then there was my older sister Rebecca, 3 years my senior and my father's perfect reflection. From childhood, she embraced everything he valued: captain of the debate team, summer internships at prestigious law firms, early acceptance to Yale. She absorbed his approval like oxygen, and in return adopted every single one of his values, prejudices, and expectations. I was different from the beginning. While Rebecca joined Junior League and networked with the children of my father's colleagues, I was taking apart old computers in our garage, fascinated by how their components could be reconfigured and improved. At 13, I built my first solar-powered charging system for our family's electronics, a clunky prototype that my father dismissed as playing with toys. My mother called it sweet, but not a real skill, while Rebecca rolled her eyes and asked when I was going to do something that actually mattered. By high school, the divide between us was painfully clear. Rebecca was class president, heading to Yale with a perfect GPA. I was the odd, environmentally obsessed girl running experiments on renewable energy sources and heading to MIT, which my father considered a technical school rather than a proper university. At my graduation dinner, Dad toasted Rebecca's, quote, guidance of her unconventional little sister. I was 18 and already erased from my own achievement narrative. College only widened the gulf between us. While Rebecca joined my father's former fraternity connections and interned at prestigious law firms, I thrived at MIT, double majoring in environmental engineering and entrepreneurship. I made the dean's list every semester, but at family gatherings, my achievements barely registered. MIT is a good engineering school, Dad would tell his colleagues, his tone suggesting it was a consolation prize for not being Yale or Harvard. The real break came after graduation. Rebecca went straight to Westridge Partners, starting as an associate in a position that mysteriously opened just as she graduated. I turned down multiple corporate job offers to start Phoenix Innovations with my roommate Jade and 2 classmates. We wanted to revolutionize residential solar technology, making sustainable energy accessible to average homeowners, not just the wealthy. Playing entrepreneur, Rebecca called it, a phase before she joins the real world. My parents' reaction was a mixture of confusion and barely disguised disappointment. "Darling, wouldn't you rather get some experience at an established company first?" Mom asked delicately over brunch when I announced my plans. Dad was more direct. "No Parker has ever worked at a startup. We build careers at respected institutions." He slid a business card across the table for a contact at a major energy corporation. I left it untouched beside my coffee cup. Those early years were brutally difficult. While Rebecca bought her first luxury condo in downtown Seattle and drove a brand new Audi, I lived in a tiny apartment with 2 roommates, eating ramen and working 18-hour days. At Christmas, Rebecca would show off her designer wardrobe while I tried to explain our latest breakthrough in flexible solar film technology to uninterested faces. "Something about panels," Dad would say vaguely when his friends asked what I did. The hardest part wasn't the work or the financial uncertainty. It was the constant doubt radiating from my family. Every holiday, every birthday dinner became an exercise in endurance. Rebecca's promotions were celebrated with champagne. My company's first million in revenue was met with, "But is it sustainable long-term?" "Not everyone can follow the traditional path," Mom would say, attempting to defend me while simultaneously suggesting I'd chosen a lesser route. Rebecca was crueler. "Tech is just a bubble," she'd say, swirling her wine. "When it bursts, I'm sure Dad can find you something in the administrative department at Westridge." 5 years in, our company secured major funding and started to gain real traction. We'd developed a revolutionary new type of solar material that could be integrated into almost any surface: windows, roofing, even clothing, at a fraction of traditional solar panels' cost. Rebecca had to find new angles for her disdain. "Anyone can get venture capital in this market," she dismissed. "They're throwing money at anything with green in the name." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. When we landed our first Fortune 500 client, she shrugged. "They're probably just filling some diversity quota by hiring a woman-led company." Mom would always try to mediate, offering platitudes like, "Both of my daughters are so accomplished in their own ways," as if we were in completely different leagues. The last family gathering before Dad's funeral had been Thanksgiving, 4 months earlier. By then, Phoenix had grown to over 300 employees with offices in 5 cities. We were featured in Wired and Fortune as one of the fastest-growing clean energy companies in America. Yet, when I arrived, nothing had changed. "How's your little solar panel project?" Dad asked, the same question he'd been asking for 7 years. Later, as we had dessert, news broke that one of our competitors had been acquired for $800 million. "Lucky timing for that industry," Rebecca remarked. "Ride the wave while it lasts, Liv." I left early that night, making a decision in my car. I would give them one more chance. My father had been having health issues, and I would be supportive, open, and try once more to build a relationship based on mutual respect. But if nothing changed, I would finally accept that my family might never see me clearly, and I would stop seeking their approval. Little did I know how dramatically that resolution would be tested. The call came on a rainy Tuesday morning in March. My father had suffered a massive heart attack in his office. By the time the ambulance arrived, he was gone. He was 65 years old. My mother's voice on the phone was hollow, mechanical. "Your father's gone, Olivia. The funeral will be Saturday at St. Mary's. Please wear something appropriate." Even in grief, the judgment lingered. I hung up and stared out my office window at the Seattle skyline, feeling a complex mixture of sorrow, regret, and a terrible kind of relief. The chance to reconcile was gone forever. In the days following his death, I tried to support my mother while giving her space to grieve. I offered to help with funeral arrangements, but Rebecca had already taken charge, coordinating with Dad's partners at the firm and his friends at the country club. When I suggested including some of Dad's favorite music, he'd secretly loved classic rock, though he'd only admit it after a scotch or 2. Rebecca dismissed it as undignified. "This isn't about your feelings, Olivia," she said sharply. "It's about honoring Dad's legacy and position in the community." 3 days before the funeral, I received an unusual email from Walter Abernathy, my father's personal attorney for over 30 years. He requested a private meeting at his office, offering no explanation. Curious, I rearranged my schedule and met him the following afternoon. Walter's office was exactly what you'd expect: dark wood, leather chairs, discreet displays of family photos, and law degrees. He greeted me with surprising warmth. "Olivia, thank you for coming. I'm sorry about Richard. He was a good friend and colleague." I nodded, unsure why I was there. Walter seemed to hesitate, choosing his words carefully. I'm handling your father's estate, as you know. The reading of the will is scheduled for immediately after the funeral service, as per his instructions. He paused. Richard visited me 2 months ago to make some significant changes to his will. He asked me not to discuss these changes with anyone, including your mother and sister, until after his passing. My confusion must have shown on my face. I can't go into details now, Walter continued, but I wanted to prepare you. There may be some surprise during the reading. Your father had been doing a lot of reflection in his final months. He wouldn't elaborate further, leaving me with more questions than answers as I left his office. The day before the funeral, I met with Dr. Bennett, my therapist of 3 years. We'd been working through my family dynamics since Phoenix's first major funding round had triggered a particularly difficult Christmas confrontation. How are you managing with the funeral preparations? She asked after I settled into my usual chair. I'm essentially an outsider, I admitted. Rebecca has orchestrated everything down to the minute. I'm just expected to show up and play my part. What would be a successful outcome for you on Saturday? She asked. I considered carefully. Closure, I suppose. A chance to say goodbye without the usual judgment. And maybe, finally, to let go of hoping for the approval I never received. We practiced responses for difficult moments. If Rebecca made dismissive comments, I would acknowledge them without defensiveness. If Mom retreated into social performativity rather than authentic grief, I would give her grace. The goal wasn't confrontation, but preservation of my own peace. The morning of the funeral dawned appropriately gray and drizzly. Rather than staying at my parents' house as expected, I'd checked into the Maple Ridge Inn, needing neutral territory and space to process my complex emotions. I dressed carefully in a conservative black dress that still felt like me, structured, modern lines that wouldn't provoke criticism but weren't a complete surrender of my identity. St. Mary's Cathedral filled quickly with Seattle's legal elite, tech executives, and Maple Ridge's old money families. As I entered, I noticed Rebecca had arranged reserved seating at the front for family and close friends. My mother sat stiffly in the first pew, surrounded by Dad's partners and their wives. Rebecca stood nearby, directing people to their seats with clipboard efficiency. When she spotted me, her expression tightened. Finally, she muttered, glancing pointedly at her watch, though I was 20 minutes early. Mom needs you to greet the Hendersons and Blakes. They've been asking for you. Where should I sit? I asked, already suspecting the answer. Rebecca gestured vaguely toward the back. We need the front rows for Dad's partners and close colleagues. There's space in the back section. The message was clear. Even in death, Dad's professional connections ranked higher than his second daughter. I nodded and moved toward the back, where distant relatives and peripheral acquaintances were seated. As I passed Mom, I leaned down to kiss her cheek. She squeezed my hand briefly but remained focused on maintaining her composure before her audience. Your father would have wanted everything just so, she whispered, smoothing her already immaculate skirt. I found a seat in the last row, watching as Rebecca continued her careful orchestration of the mourners. The service proceeded with polished dignity, exactly as Dad would have expected. His senior partner delivered a eulogy highlighting his professional achievements and community standing. A longtime client spoke about his legal brilliance. Rebecca shared carefully curated family memories that portrayed Dad as the perfect father, mentor, and guide, with special emphasis on how he had shaped her own successful legal career. No one mentioned his passion for sailing, his secret love of science fiction novels, or how he could name every constellation in the night sky, the human details I'd glimpsed in rare unguarded moments throughout my childhood. At the end of the service, Walter Abernathy approached the podium. Richard Parker has requested that the reading of his will take place immediately following this service. The family and those named in the will are asked to remain. A murmur of surprise rippled through the cathedral. This was unconventional, to say the least. Typically, the reading would occur privately at Walter's office days later. Rebecca looked startled and quickly consulted with Mom, who appeared equally confused. Most attendees filed out, heading toward their cars for the procession to the cemetery. About 20 people remained. My mother, Rebecca, and her husband, Dad's partners, a few cousins, and several people I didn't recognize, and me, still in my back row seat. Walter cleared his throat and opened a leather portfolio. This is the last will and testament of Richard James Parker, revised and signed on January 12th of this year, properly witnessed and notarized. He began with standard legal preamble, then moved to specific bequests. Dad's partners received meaningful mementos, an antique fountain pen collection, his first edition law books. Cousins and friends were mentioned with modest financial gifts. To my wife, Eleanor Catherine Parker, Walter continued, I leave our residence at 47 Oakwood Lane, its contents, and a trust of $5 million to maintain her standard of living. Mom nodded slightly, unsurprised. This was essentially what everyone expected. To my daughter, Rebecca Ann Parker Whitman, I leave my collection of legal texts, my membership at Maple Ridge Country Club, and a one-time gift of $1 million. Rebecca's head snapped up, her expression shifting from composed grief to shock. $1 million was substantial, but far less than the significant share of the estate she'd clearly been expecting. Her husband placed a steadying hand on her arm. Walter continued without pausing. The remainder of my estate, including my controlling interest in Westridge Partners valued at approximately $75 million. All investment accounts, properties in Aspen and San Juan Islands, and all other assets not specifically designated. I leave to my daughter, Olivia Grace Parker. The cathedral fell absolutely silent. I sat frozen, certain I had misheard. Walter looked up from the document. Additionally, I am exercising my authority as founding partner to name Olivia Parker as my successor on the executive board of Westridge Partners, effective immediately. Rebecca stood up, her face flushed with anger. This is a mistake. Dad would never. Walter raised his hand. There is a letter attached to the will that Richard instructed me to read at this time. He retrieved an envelope from his portfolio and broke the seal. To my family, he read in my father's familiar clipped tones. If Walter is reading this, then I've run out of time to say these things in person, which is perhaps fitting given my lifelong difficulty with expressing emotion. For most of my life, I measured success by a narrow set of metrics: prestige, tradition, appearance. I pushed these values onto my daughters, celebrating Rebecca for following my predetermined path, while failing to recognize the extraordinary vision and courage of Olivia. Last October, I was diagnosed with a heart condition that made me confront my mortality. During those same months, I began quietly researching Olivia's company, reading everything from technical analyses to employee reviews. What I discovered was not a little solar project, but a groundbreaking enterprise poised to transform an entire industry. I visited Phoenix Innovations' Seattle headquarters anonymously, posing as a potential investor. I watched my daughter lead a brilliant team with confidence and purpose. I saw the respect in her employees' eyes. I realized then that while I had spent decades building a successful law practice, Olivia was building something truly meaningful for the future. Rebecca has benefited from every advantage I could provide: connections, opportunities, direct mentorship. She has been well compensated at Westridge and will continue her career there if she chooses, though perhaps with greater humility going forward. Olivia built something extraordinary, despite my lack of support, not because of my help. This inheritance is not a gift, but a belated acknowledgement of her abilities and a rebalancing of the scales I unfairly tipped for too long. Eleanor, I hope you will forgive my secrecy and recognize the wisdom in this decision, even if it conflicts with our long-held expectations. Rebecca, I have loved you dearly and remain proud of your achievements, but true growth comes from challenge, not continued privilege. Olivia, I regret that it took facing my mortality to recognize your brilliance. I hope this legacy provides not just resources but the acknowledgement you deserved all along. To all of you, I offer my imperfect love and the wisdom of a man who realized too late that innovation requires courage, not conformity. Richard Parker. Walter folded the letter and looked up. The silence in the cathedral was absolute. My mother sat motionless, her perfectly composed facade finally cracking to reveal genuine shock. Rebecca stood rigidly beside her husband, her knuckles white as she gripped the pew in front of her. And I remained in my back row seat, tears streaming silently down my face. Not for the inheritance, but for the recognition that had come too late for any real reconciliation. This is ridiculous. Rebecca finally hissed, her voice echoing in the quiet space. He wasn't thinking clearly. The doctor said his medication could affect his judgment. We'll contest this. Walter shook his head slightly. Your father was of completely sound mind, Rebecca. I personally ensured all proper procedures were followed. Multiple physicians and psychological evaluations confirmed his capacity. This will is ironclad. Rebecca turned to our mother. Mom, say something. This can't be what Dad really wanted. Mom looked between her daughters, her social training failing her in this unprecedented situation. I had no idea he was planning this, she said quietly. He never discussed it with me. Of course not, Rebecca snapped. Because it's insane. Olivia doesn't know the first thing about running a law firm. She plays with solar panels and makes grand claims about saving the environment while the rest of us do real work. I finally stood up, my legs unsteady but my voice calm. I think we should continue this conversation privately, not in Dad's place of memorial. How convenient, Rebecca shot back. Now that you've somehow manipulated Dad into giving you everything, you want privacy. The failure in the family suddenly inherits the kingdom. Tell me, what did you say to him during those last months? What sob story did you sell? One of Dad's partners cleared his throat uncomfortably. Perhaps we should give the family some space. As the remaining attendees filed out awkwardly, I approached my mother and sister. Mom looked up at me with confused eyes. Did you know about this? No, I said honestly. Walter called me to his office but didn't explain why. I had no idea. I don't believe you, Rebecca said flatly. Dad would never have done this without outside influence. You saw him getting sick and took advantage. The accusations stung, but I maintained my composure. When was the last time you actually spoke with Dad about Phoenix? About what we're doing? Did you ever once ask him to visit our facilities or understand our technology? Rebecca waved dismissively. Why would I waste time on your hobby company when I was helping run Dad's firm? Because that hobby company is revolutionizing renewable energy infrastructure across 3 continents, I replied evenly. Because we're making sustainability accessible to average homeowners instead of just the wealthy. Because what we're building will still matter 50 years from now. And now, you think you can run Westridge better than me? Rebecca laughed bitterly. You don't know the first thing about corporate law. I don't intend to practice law at Westridge, I said. I'll remain focused on Phoenix. But as board member, I can ensure the firm begins developing expertise in renewable energy law, sustainability compliance, and clean tech patents, expanding into the fastest-growing legal sectors, instead of relying solely on traditional corporate clients. Mom looked between us, her social training finally reasserting itself. Girls, please. Your father wouldn't want this kind of scene at his funeral. We should proceed to the cemetery. People will be waiting. As we moved toward the doors, Rebecca paused beside me. This isn't over, she whispered. The back row is where you belong, Olivia. You've always been the family disappointment, and no surprise inheritance will change that. I watched her walk ahead, spine rigid with fury, and felt a curious sense of calm. The words that would once have devastated me now seemed like the last gasps of a power dynamic that had just been permanently altered. Outside the cathedral, dark clouds had given way to unexpected afternoon sunshine breaking through a metaphorical shift I couldn't have scripted better myself. As we prepared to depart for the cemetery, my phone buzzed with a message from Jade. NASA contract confirmed. They want the solar film for the new station modules. Call when you can. In that moment, standing between my father's funeral and the revelation that had upended our family hierarchy, I realized something profound. I had spent years seeking validation from people who had fundamentally misunderstood both me and the changing world around them. The inheritance was meaningful not for its financial value, but because it represented my father's belated recognition of this truth. Walter approached as I was about to enter the funeral car. Your father came to one of your public presentations 6 months ago, he said quietly. You didn't see him. He stayed in the back. Afterward, he told me it was like watching someone operating in a different dimension from everyone else. He said she sees where the world is going, not just where it's been. That's when he started revising his will. I swallowed hard, imagining my father sitting anonymously in an audience, finally seeing me clearly for perhaps the first time. "Thank you for telling me," I managed. As the funeral procession pulled away from St. Mary's, I looked back at the cathedral one last time. The back row had given me a perspective my sister and mother had never had. The ability to see the entire room, to observe rather than just perform. Perhaps being the family disappointment had been my greatest advantage all along. The drive to the cemetery was silent, our family separated by more than just the physical space between us in the sleek black limousine. Mom stared out the window, her profile as rigid as a cameo silhouette against the glass. Rebecca sat across from me, her eyes fixed on her phone, aggressively typing what I assumed were messages to her husband or perhaps calls to family attorneys. I watched Seattle's familiar landscape slide by, trying to process the seismic shift that had just occurred in our family dynamics. Maple Ridge Memorial Gardens was where generations of prominent Seattle families were buried, its rolling green hills dotted with tasteful monuments and centuries-old trees. Dad's plot was situated on a gentle slope overlooking the lake, prime real estate, as he would have appreciated. The remaining funeral attendees gathered around the gravesite, their expressions a mixture of appropriate sorrow and poorly disguised curiosity. News of the unexpected will reading had clearly spread. I stood slightly apart from Mom and Rebecca during the graveside service, the physical distance, a visible manifestation of our emotional reality. As the minister spoke final words over my father's casket, I noticed Walter standing at the periphery, his expression thoughtful as he watched our family. Had Dad confided more in his attorney than his own wife and daughters? The thought brought a fresh wave of complex emotions. Grief for the father I'd never truly known, regret for the relationship we'd never managed to build, and a complicated gratitude for his final acknowledgement. When the service concluded, Rebecca immediately pulled Mom away toward a cluster of family friends, clearly intending to exclude me from the conversations. I didn't fight it, instead taking a moment alone by my father's casket before it would be lowered into the ground. "I wish you'd told me," I whispered, touching the polished wood briefly. "Not about the inheritance, but about seeing my presentation, about understanding what I've been trying to build. We could have found some common ground while you were still here." A hand touched my shoulder gently, and I turned to find Davis Chen, one of Dad's oldest friends, and a respected venture capitalist who had funded numerous tech companies. "Your father was a proud man, Olivia," he said quietly. "Too proud sometimes to admit when he'd been wrong. But he watched your career more closely than you realized, especially this past year." I looked at him in surprise. "You knew?" Davis nodded. "Richard called me about 6 months ago, asking my professional opinion about Phoenix's technology and business model. It was the first time he'd ever sought my input about anything related to your work. He listened carefully to my assessment, asked insightful questions. When I told him I considered Phoenix one of the most promising clean energy companies I'd seen in decades, something changed in his expression, pride mixed with regret. "He never said anything to me," I said. As I said, he was a proud man. Acknowledging he'd been wrong about your career choice for all these years wouldn't have been easy for him. Davis squeezed my shoulder gently. "But actions speak louder than words, don't they?" And his final action speaks volumes. As Davis walked away, I noticed Rebecca approaching, her face set in determined lines. "We need to talk," she said tightly. "Not here. Tomorrow at Walter's office, 9 a.m. Bring your lawyer." "I don't think we need lawyers to have a conversation, Rebecca." Her laugh was brittle. "You've just been handed control of a $75 million law firm you know nothing about. Trust me, you need a lawyer." She glanced toward the parking area where mourners were slowly dispersing. "By the way, several of Dad's clients are already expressing concerns about the firm's stability with this unusual transition. The legal community is small, and word travels fast." The implied threat was clear. She was prepared to damage Westridge's reputation to force my hand. "I'll be there," I said simply. "And Rebecca? I'm sorry this has come between us. It wasn't my doing." She stared at me coldly. "You've always played the victim so well, Olivia. Misunderstood genius, underappreciated visionary. Dad finally fell for it, but I never will. You may have his money now, but you'll never have his legacy. You haven't earned it. As she walked away, I realized how thoroughly she believed her own narrative, that I had somehow manipulated our father, that my success was a trick rather than the result of years of innovation and perseverance. The thought was exhausting. I declined the invitation to the post-funeral reception at my parents' home, using the NASA contract as a legitimate excuse. The truth was, I couldn't face hours of thinly veiled hostility and curious stares. Instead, I returned to my hotel room and called an emergency meeting with my executive team. I need everyone on video in 30 minutes, I told Jade. We have the NASA contract, which is fantastic, but there's been another development that will affect Phoenix's future. While waiting for the call, I changed out of my funeral clothes into jeans and a simple blouse, returning to my authentic self after hours of performative mourning. When my team assembled virtually, their faces filled my laptop screen. Jade, my co-founder and chief operating officer, Marcus, our chief technical officer, Elena, our chief financial officer, and Darius, our chief legal counsel. First, congratulations on the NASA contract, I began. That's a game changer for our space division and validates everything we've been saying about our technology's applications in extreme environments. Their smiles faded as I continued. But there's something else. My father passed away, as you know. What you don't know is that he left me controlling interest in his law firm, Westridge Partners, valued at approximately $75 million. Stunned silence greeted this announcement. Holy shit, Jade finally said, eloquent as always. The father who thought Phoenix was a cute hobby project? The very same, I confirmed. He apparently had a change of heart in his final months. He also named me to the executive board of Westridge, effective immediately. Darius leaned forward. Olivia, Westridge is one of the top corporate firms in the Pacific Northwest. This is significant, but it also creates potential conflicts of interest with your role at Phoenix. I'm aware, I said. That's why I need your help figuring out the right approach. I have no interest in practicing law or running Westridge day to day. My priority remains Phoenix, but I also can't just walk away from my father's legacy or the responsibility he's entrusted to me. Your sister must be livid, Jade said, having met Rebecca at a charity event years earlier and experienced her condescension firsthand. That's putting it mildly. We're meeting tomorrow with the family attorney. She's bringing legal representation, so I need you there, Darius. For the next hour, we strategized. Elena analyzed the financial implications of adding Westridge to my personal portfolio. Darius outlined governance structures that would allow me to maintain oversight of Westridge while focusing on Phoenix. Marcus and Jade discussed how we might leverage Westridge's legal expertise to strengthen our intellectual property protections. By the time we ended the call, I had a clear vision of how to proceed, not just for the meeting with Rebecca, but for the integration of these two seemingly disparate parts of my life. That night, I called Dr. Bennett for an emergency session, needing to process the emotional whiplash of the day. It feels unreal, I told her. After years of dismissing my work, Dad not only recognized its value, but considered it more meaningful than the traditional path he'd always championed. How does that recognition feel, coming after his death rather than during his life? She asked. I considered carefully. Bittersweet. I'm grateful he eventually saw value in my work, but sad we never had the chance to build a relationship based on that understanding. And I'm struggling with the family fallout. Rebecca sees this as me stealing her birthright. And your mother? I'm not sure she knows what to think. She's always followed Dad's lead. Now she has to choose between his final wishes and the daughter who's followed all the rules. Dr. Bennett nodded thoughtfully. What would success look like for you moving forward? Not just professionally with these new responsibilities, but personally with your family. The question cut to the heart of my confusion. What did I actually want from this situation, beyond handling it with integrity? Professionally, I want to honor Dad's unexpected faith in me by ensuring Westridge thrives while staying focused on Phoenix's mission. Personally, I paused, realizing the truth as I spoke it. I don't need Rebecca's approval anymore. I've spent years seeking validation from people who were constitutionally incapable of giving it. What I want now is peace, the freedom to build something meaningful without the weight of family disapproval. That sounds like a significant shift in perspective, Dr. Bennett observed. It is, I agreed. Maybe the inheritance itself matters less than the fact that Dad finally saw me clearly. That knowledge is liberating, whether Rebecca and Mom ever come around or not. The next morning, I arrived at Walter's office 15 minutes early, dressed in a structured navy suit that projected confidence without ostentation. Darius met me in the lobby, his calm presence reassuring. "Remember, you're negotiating from a position of strength," he murmured as we rode the elevator. "Your sister may have spent her career at Westridge, but you legally control it now. Don't let her pressure you into hasty decisions." Walter's conference room was already occupied when we entered. Rebecca sat with two attorneys I recognized as partners from a rival firm. Mom sat slightly apart, looking uncomfortable with the adversarial setup. Walter stood at the head of the table, his expression carefully neutral. "Thank you all for coming," he began once we were seated. "I've asked for this meeting to clarify the terms of Richard's will and address any questions about the transition of Westridge leadership." Rebecca's attorney, a silver-haired man named James Harrington, spoke first. "My client has serious concerns about the stability of Westridge Partners under this unprecedented arrangement. Ms. Parker has no legal background, no relationship with the firm's clients, and no understanding of the firm's operations. This creates an untenable situation that threatens the livelihoods of over 200 employees." I maintained a neutral expression as Darius responded. "With respect, Richard Parker's wishes were explicitly clear. He named Olivia to the executive board, with full knowledge of her background. The will reflects his confidence in her judgment and leadership capabilities, which she has amply demonstrated as the founder and CEO of a successful technology company." Rebecca leaned forward. "Let's cut through the legal posturing. Olivia, you and I both know you can't run Westridge. You don't know the first thing about corporate law or client relationships. I've spent my entire career there. The logical solution is for you to sign over controlling interest to me in exchange for the financial assets. You get Dad's money. I maintain his professional legacy. Everyone wins." The straightforwardness of her proposal was almost refreshing after years of subtle undermining. This was Rebecca in her element, direct, transactional, convinced of her own rightness. "I appreciate your concern for the firm," I said carefully. "But I have no intention of simply signing over Dad's legacy without ensuring his wishes are honored." Her face flushed. "His wishes? You manipulated a dying man into changing his will. That's the only explanation that makes sense." "Rebecca," Mom interjected, her voice strained. "We don't know that." "Of course we do," Rebecca snapped. "Dad spent 30 years grooming me to take over Westridge. Then suddenly, in his final months, he hands everything to Olivia? It's obviously the result of undue influence." Walter cleared his throat. "I feel compelled to state for the record that Richard was of completely sound mind when he made these changes. He underwent independent psychological evaluations specifically to prevent such challenges. Furthermore, he explained his reasoning clearly, both in the letter I read yesterday and in private conversations with me." "What exactly did he say?" Mom asked quietly. It was the first direct question she'd posed about Dad's decision. Walter glanced at me, seeking permission to share private conversations. I nodded. "Richard told me he had been researching Phoenix Innovations extensively," Walter said. "He was impressed by the company's technology, growth trajectory, and particularly by Olivia's leadership. He said, and I quote, 'I've spent my career helping corporations maximize profit within existing systems. Olivia is actually building new systems that solve real problems. That's a legacy worth supporting.'" Rebecca scoffed. "So he threw away 30 years of my dedication because Olivia's solar panels suddenly seemed trendy? That's absurd." "It wasn't about trendiness," I said, my patience wearing thin. "It was about impact. About building something that matters beyond quarterly profits." Phoenix is creating technology that will help address climate change, reduce energy poverty, and create sustainable infrastructure. That's not a trend, it's the future. Oh, spare me the Save the World speech, Rebecca retorted. We've all heard it before. Meanwhile, I've been doing the unglamorous work of actually running Dad's business, while you've been playing visionary with venture capital money. I took a deep breath, reminding myself that responding to her provocations would only escalate the conflict. Instead, I turned to Walter. I've given this considerable thought, I said. I don't intend to disrupt Westridge's operations or undermine its stability. I propose creating a transitional governance structure that respects Dad's wishes while acknowledging the expertise within the firm. I outlined the plan I developed with my team, a restructured executive committee including Rebecca, Walter, and 2 other senior partners, with me serving as chairperson. Day-to-day operations would remain largely unchanged, but the firm would gradually develop new practice areas in renewable energy law, sustainability compliance, and clean tech patents, growing into emerging fields rather than relying solely on traditional corporate clients. Additionally, I continued, I propose establishing the Richard Parker Innovation Fund within Westridge, dedicated to providing pro bono legal services to promising clean technology startups. This honors Dad's legacy while building for the future. Walter nodded thoughtfully. Richard would have appreciated that approach. It maintains the firm's stability while evolving its focus. Rebecca's attorney leaned over to whisper in her ear. She listened, her expression tightening. This is a transparent attempt to use Westridge to benefit your own company and industry, she said finally. You get to play corporate lawyer without actually doing the work, while redirecting resources toward your pet causes. Phoenix and Westridge will maintain appropriate corporate separation, Darius interjected, with proper governance protocols to address any potential conflicts of interest. This is a standard approach when an individual holds board positions across multiple entities. Mom, who had been listening silently, finally spoke. I think your proposal sounds reasonable, Olivia. It respects your father's wishes while acknowledging Rebecca's contributions to the firm. Rebecca turned to her in disbelief. You're taking her side now? After everything I've done to follow the path you and Dad laid out? I'm not taking sides, Mom said with unexpected firmness. I'm trying to honor your father's final wishes while finding a compromise that works for both my daughters. This family has spent too many years divided by rigid expectations. Perhaps this is an opportunity to build something new together. It was the first time I could remember Mom directly challenging the family's established hierarchy. Rebecca looked as shocked as I felt. The discussion continued for another hour, growing increasingly technical as the attorneys debated governance structures and voting rights. Throughout, Rebecca maintained her position that the entire arrangement was fundamentally flawed, while reluctantly engaging with the specifics of my proposal. Finally, Walter called for a break. As the attorneys stepped out to confer, Mom approached me by the window overlooking Elliott Bay. Your father visited Phoenix's headquarters 3 times in his final months, she said quietly. He never told you because he wanted to observe without influencing anything. He came home from the first visit unusually quiet. After the third, he stayed up all night in his study. When I asked what he was doing, he said he was, quote, rewriting the future. I stared at her. You knew about the will changes? She shook her head. Not the specifics, but I knew something had shifted in how he saw your work. He started reading about renewable energy, watching documentaries about climate change. He subscribed to technology journals. It was like watching him discover a whole new world he'd previously dismissed. Tears pricked my eyes. Why didn't you tell me? He asked me not to. He said he needed time to reconsider many things. She touched my arm gently. Olivia, your father was not an emotionally expressive man. He struggled to admit when he was wrong, but in his final months, he found a way to show you what he couldn't say directly. As Mom walked away, I gazed out at the Seattle skyline, the familiar outline of buildings where I'd grown up feeling like an outsider in my own family. For years I'd worked to prove my worth to people who lacked the vision to see it. Now the tables had turned in a way I never could have anticipated. When we reconvened, Rebecca's demeanor had shifted subtly. The outright hostility had been replaced by cold professionalism. I've consulted with my attorneys, she said. While I maintain that this situation is problematic, I recognize the legal reality. I'm willing to work within the proposed governance structure on two conditions. First, I want to be named managing partner for client relations, maintaining my relationships with our key accounts. Second, I want written assurance that Phoenix will never receive preferential legal treatment from Westridge. It was a significant concession, acknowledging that outright opposition would be futile. I nodded. Those terms are acceptable. I'll have the agreements drafted immediately. Walter looked relieved. I believe Richard would be pleased with this resolution. It respects his wishes while preserving the strengths of both his daughters. As we prepared to leave, Rebecca approached me directly for the first time without hostility. "Just so we're clear," she said quietly, "I still believe Dad made a mistake. Nothing about this changes my opinion of your work or your methods, but I won't damage his firm out of spite." "I wouldn't expect anything less," I replied honestly. "We don't have to like each other to work together effectively." Her smile was thin, but not entirely cold. On that, at least, we can agree. As Darius and I left the building, he gave me an impressed look. "You handled that masterfully." Most people would have been either intimidated by their family or drunk on their new power. You found the middle path. I watched Seattle's perpetual rain begin to fall, creating ripples in the puddles along the sidewalk. I've spent my whole life navigating between standing my ground and keeping the peace. I guess it finally came in handy. That evening, alone in my hotel room, I received an unexpected text from Mom. "Having dinner at home tonight. Just me. Would welcome company if you're free." The invitation surprised me. Usually, family dinners were formal affairs organized weeks in advance. This spontaneous, casual invitation was unprecedented. My finger hovered over the phone. It would be easier to decline, to maintain the emotional distance I'd cultivated over years of disappointment. But something about the simplicity of her message suggested a genuine desire for connection, rather than obligation. "I'll bring wine," I texted back. The house I grew up in looked exactly the same as I pulled into the driveway, a stately colonial that had always felt more like a museum than a home. But when Mom opened the door, she was wearing jeans and a casual sweater, rather than her usual perfectly coordinated outfit. Another first. "I hope you like pasta," she said, leading me to the kitchen rather than the formal dining room. "It's one of the few things I can cook without help." The kitchen island was set for two with everyday plates rather than the fine china that typically signified family meals. A pot of pasta sauce simmered on the stove, filling the room with the scent of basil and garlic. "Can I help?" I asked, setting down the wine. "You can open that," she said, nodding toward the bottle. "And maybe tell me about this NASA contract Jade mentioned when she called to check on you." A thoughtful girl, she seemed genuinely concerned about how you were holding up. As I opened the wine, I realized Mom had been talking to Jade, my business partner, whom the family had always politely ignored at the few company events they'd attended. The shift was subtle but significant. Over simple pasta and good wine, Mom asked questions about Phoenix. Real questions about our technology, our team, our vision for the future. She listened with genuine interest as I explained our work with NASA to develop solar film for space habitats. "I never really understood what you were building," she admitted as we cleared the plates. "It seemed so abstract compared to Rebecca's work, which I could easily explain to friends." "My daughter is a corporate attorney" sounds impressive at charity luncheons. "My daughter is developing integrated photovoltaic nanomaterials" just made me sound like I was making things up. I laughed. "We work hard to make the technology sound complicated so people will pay premium prices." She smiled, then grew serious. "I owe you an apology, Olivia. I let your father's narrow definition of success shape how I saw both my daughters. I celebrated Rebecca's achievements because they were familiar and comfortable. I didn't make the effort to understand your world because it seemed foreign and complicated." "It's okay, Mom," I said automatically. "No, it's not." She met my eyes directly. Parents should support their children's dreams, not just the dreams they understand. Your father realized that too late. I don't want to make the same mistake. As we talked into the evening, I began to see my mother clearly for perhaps the first time. Not just as the passive corporate wife who had enabled Dad's rigid expectations, but as a woman who had made her own compromises and was now, in widowhood, discovering the possibility of different choices. "What will you do now?" I asked. "With Dad gone and the house to yourself?" She looked around the kitchen thoughtfully. "I'm not entirely sure. I've spent decades organizing my life around your father's career and social position. Now I need to figure out who Eleanor Parker is when she's not defined by being Richard Parker's wife." She smiled slightly. "Perhaps I'll start by visiting my daughter's company and actually learning what integrated photovoltaic nanomaterials are." When I left that night, Mom hugged me with uncharacteristic warmth. "Your father was right, you know," she said softly. "What you're building matters more than he understood for most of his life." I'm sorry it took his death for us to begin seeing it clearly. Driving back to my hotel, I reflected on the strange journey of the past 2 days. I had arrived for my father's funeral as the family disappointment, seated in the back row and excluded from the inner circle of grief. I was leaving as the heir to his business empire, with a mother who was finally trying to see me clearly and a sister who, while not accepting me, at least acknowledged my right to exist in her world. The inheritance itself, the money and position, was less significant than what it represented. My father's belated recognition that innovation requires courage, not conformity. That sometimes the people who disappoint us by charting their own course are the very ones who lead us toward a better future. I thought of all the young entrepreneurs facing similar struggles, brilliant minds with bold visions, dismissed by those who can't see beyond traditional metrics of success. How many world-changing ideas had been abandoned because their creators lacked the stubborn persistence to withstand being the family disappointment? My phone buzzed with a text from Jade. "NASA team wants full presentation next week. You ready to show them the future?" I smiled, typing back, "Always ready." The future doesn't build itself. As Seattle's lights glittered in my rearview mirror, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in years. The back row had given me perspective. The disappointment had forged resilience. And now, the unexpected inheritance had provided not just resources, but validation that the path I'd chosen, however unconventional, had been right all along. The week following my father's funeral unfolded with startling intensity. By Monday morning, news of the inheritance had spread through Seattle's business community, prompting a flurry of calls from journalists seeking statements about the quote-quote tech entrepreneur taking over legendary law firm. I declined all interview requests, focusing instead on implementing the transition plan at Westridge while preparing for the NASA presentation. My executive team at Phoenix had shifted into high gear, working around the clock to refine our presentation for the space agency. Our solar film technology had revolutionary potential for space habitats, lightweight, flexible materials that could generate power while providing radiation shielding. If successful, this contract would establish Phoenix as a key player in the aerospace sector, expanding our impact beyond Earth-based applications. On Tuesday morning, I walked into Westridge Partners for the first time as its controlling owner. The firm occupied 4 floors of a sleek downtown tower, its reception area a testament to old-world professional success, dark wood, leather furniture, and oil paintings of stern-looking founding partners, including my father. Walter met me in the lobby, his familiar presence providing a bridge between my past and this unexpected present. "The senior partners are assembled in the main conference room," he said. "Most are curious, some apprehensive. Your sister arrived early and has been speaking with them." I nodded, unsurprised that Rebecca would attempt to shape the narrative before I arrived. "Any specific concerns I should address?" "Primarily continuity and stability. Many have spent their entire careers here and fear radical change." He hesitated. "Also, there are questions about your qualifications to lead a law firm." "Legitimate questions," I acknowledged. "I don't pretend to be a legal expert. That's why I need their expertise." The conference room fell silent as I entered. 20 partners sat around a massive table, their expressions ranging from open curiosity to thinly veiled skepticism. Rebecca sat at the far end, her posture rigid but professional. I recognized most of the faces from family events over the years, people who had known me since childhood, but had never actually seen me as more than Richard Parker's unconventional younger daughter. Good morning, I began, taking the seat at the head of the table. My father's former position. Thank you for meeting on short notice. I recognize this transition is unexpected for everyone, myself included. I'm here to listen to your concerns, share my vision, and establish a collaborative path forward. For the next hour, I outlined the governance structure I'd proposed, maintaining the firm's core practices while gradually expanding into emerging legal fields related to renewable energy, sustainable business practices, and clean technology. I emphasized that day-to-day operations would remain largely unchanged, with Rebecca maintaining key client relationships. I'm not here to practice law or micromanage your expertise, I concluded. I'm here to help Westridge evolve alongside changing market dynamics, just as my father did throughout his career. He built this firm by anticipating client needs and positioning Westridge ahead of trends. This is a continuation of that philosophy, not a departure from it. The questions came rapidly after that, some pointed, others genuinely curious. I answered each honestly, acknowledging my limitations while emphasizing my strengths in strategic vision and organizational leadership. Martin Chen, a senior partner who had worked alongside my father for 30 years, spoke last. Your father and I didn't always agree, but I respected his judgment. If he believed you were the right person to guide Westridge's future, I'm inclined to trust that assessment. He glanced around the table. I suggest we give Ms. Parker's approach 6 months to demonstrate results before forming judgments. The sentiment seemed to resonate with most partners. As the meeting concluded, several approached with business cards and invitations to discuss specific practice areas. Rebecca remained seated, watching these interactions with a carefully neutral expression. When we were finally alone, she spoke. You handled that better than I expected. Coming from Rebecca, this qualified as effusive praise. I've been pitching to skeptical audiences for years, I replied. Venture capitalists are at least as intimidating as law partners. They'll be watching for any sign of weakness or incompetence, she warned. One misstep and they'll start looking for ways to challenge your authority. I'm counting on you to help prevent those missteps, I said. You know this firm better than anyone. I need your expertise, Rebecca, whether or not you approve of Dad's decision. She considered this, then nodded curtly. I'll send you briefings on our top 10 clients and current major cases. Review them before you meet with anyone else here. She gathered her files and stood. Not for you. For Dad's legacy and the firm's stability. It wasn't reconciliation, but it was cooperation. A start I wouldn't have thought possible days earlier. The rest of the week passed in a blur of meetings, preparations, and late nights. I divided my time between Phoenix's headquarters and Westridge's offices, learning to navigate my dual responsibilities. By Friday, when our team departed for the NASA presentation in Houston, I was operating on minimal sleep but maximum determination. The NASA contract presentation would normally have consumed all my focus, but now it represented just one facet of my expanding responsibilities. As our private plane took off from Seattle, Jade studied me with concern. When was the last time you slept more than 4 hours? She asked. Tuesday, maybe? I smiled ruefully. I've been running on adrenaline and cold brew. She handed me a pillow from the plane's storage compartment. Sleep now. I'll wake you when we're an hour out so you can review the presentation again. I must have been more exhausted than I realized because I fell asleep almost instantly. When Jade gently shook me awake, we were already descending into Houston. Better? She asked. I nodded, feeling surprisingly refreshed. Thanks for forcing me to rest. I needed that. That's why we're partners, she said simply. You push forward relentlessly. I make sure you don't collapse before reaching the finish line. The NASA Johnson Space Center impressed even our tech-savvy team. As we were escorted through security to the presentation room, Marcus whispered, We're actually at mission control. This is where they guided the moon landings. The significance of the moment wasn't lost on any of us. Phoenix had begun in a cramped apartment with salvaged computer equipment and ambitious dreams. Now we were presenting to the agency responsible for humanity's greatest explorations, offering technology that could help establish sustainable habitats beyond Earth. The presentation room contained 15 NASA officials, engineers, scientists, and procurement specialists who would evaluate our technology. I recognized Dr. Eliza Washington, the project lead whose research on space habitation had inspired some of our development approaches. Thank you for the opportunity to present today, I began. Phoenix Innovations was founded on the belief that renewable energy technology could transform how we power our world. Today, we're excited to demonstrate how that same technology can help humanity establish a sustainable presence beyond our planet. For the next hour, our team presented the technical specifications, testing data, and implementation roadmap for our solar film technology. Marcus detailed the nanomaterial structure that made the film both lightweight and durable in extreme conditions. Elena outlined the cost efficiencies compared to traditional solar arrays. I focused on the broader vision, how our technology could be integrated into habitat design, providing both power generation and radiation shielding in one system. The questions from NASA's team were rigorous, probing the limits of our technology and challenging our assumptions. We had anticipated most of their concerns and provided data-driven responses, but several questions pushed us into uncharted territory. Dr. Washington was particularly focused on radiation resistance in deep space conditions. Your Earth orbit testing data is impressive, Ms. Parker. But Mars missions would expose these materials to significantly different radiation profiles. How confident are you in performance under those conditions? It was a fair question, and one for which we didn't have complete data. I could have offered reassurances or promised future testing, but instead chose honesty. We've modeled performance under simulated deep space conditions, but we don't have actual exposure data beyond Earth orbit, I acknowledged. That's actually why we're especially interested in this partnership. NASA's expertise in deep space environments, combined with our materials innovation, could accelerate development of next-generation solutions specifically optimized for Mars missions. Dr. Washington nodded, seeming to appreciate the candid response. The questioning continued for another hour, diving deep into technical specifications and implementation challenges. By the time we concluded, the energy in the room felt positive. These were the engaged questions of potential collaborators, not the skeptical inquiries of doubtful evaluators. As we packed up our presentation materials, Dr. Washington approached me privately. Your father was Richard Parker, correct? I saw the news about his passing. My condolences. Thank you, I said, surprised by the personal comment. I met him once at a conference on space law, she continued. He was speaking about legal frameworks for commercial space ventures. Brilliant mind. He mentioned he had a daughter working in renewable energy, though he didn't elaborate. The comment struck me. Dad had acknowledged my work in professional settings, even while dismissing it at family gatherings. Another glimpse of the complex man behind the stern patriarch. He and I had different visions of success, I said carefully, but I think in the end we were starting to find common ground. She nodded thoughtfully. In my experience, the most revolutionary innovations often come from those willing to diverge from established paths. Your technology reflects that courage. She handed me her card with a handwritten note on the back. Call my direct line next week. I think there's potential for collaboration beyond this initial contract. On the flight back to Seattle, our team celebrated the promising reception while already planning refinements based on NASA's feedback. The energy was electric. This partnership could dramatically accelerate our research while establishing Phoenix as a pioneer in space-based applications. Amid the excitement, I found myself thinking about my father. Would he have been proud to see his daughter presenting cutting-edge technology to NASA? Would he have recognized the connection between his work in space law and my work in space technology? I would never know for certain, but his final actions suggested he had begun to see the parallels between our different paths to meaningful impact. When we landed in Seattle late that evening, I was surprised to find Walter waiting at the private terminal. Is everything all right? I asked, immediately concerned about my mother or issues at Westridge. Everything's fine, he assured me, but there's something at your father's office that you should see. Tonight, if possible. Curious, I followed Walter to Westridge's building. The offices were dark and silent as we rode the elevator to the top floor, where my father's corner office overlooked the city and Puget Sound beyond. "I was organizing your father's personal files when I found this," Walter said, unlocking the office door. "He left specific instructions that it should be given to you after the will reading, but only when you were alone." The office was exactly as I remembered from childhood visits. Imposing desk, law books lining the walls, the smell of leather and subtle cologne. Walter crossed to a painting of Mount Rainier that had hung there for decades and swung it forward, revealing a wall safe. "He changed the combination last year," Walter said, entering a 6-digit code. "To 071592. I inhaled sharply, recognizing the date, July 15, 1992, my birthday. The safe contained a single item, a leather-bound journal with my father's initials embossed on the cover. Walter handed it to me. "I'll give you privacy," he said, moving toward the door. "Take as long as you need. The security team knows you're here." Alone in my father's office, I ran my fingers over the journal's cover before opening it. The first entry was dated October 8th of the previous year, shortly after his diagnosis. "Today I received news that fundamentally changes everything," he had written in his precise handwriting. "Terminal heart condition, 6 months to a year with treatment." The time constraint forces clarity. What legacy am I truly leaving behind? I turned the pages slowly, reading entries that chronicled his final months. Not focused on his illness, but on his reassessment of his life's work and values. He wrote about researching Phoenix, attending my presentations anonymously, and gradually recognizing the short-sightedness of his previous dismissal. "Watched O present to a room of industry leaders today," one entry read. "The confidence, vision, and technical command she displayed was extraordinary. Not just competent, but truly visionary. Where did this remarkable woman come from? And how did I fail to see her potential for so many years?" Another entry detailed his growing concern about Rebecca. "R has mastered the path I laid out for her, but I wonder if I've done her a disservice. She executes brilliantly but struggles to innovate beyond established parameters. Have I taught her to succeed within systems but not to question or improve them? O creates new paradigms, while R excels within existing ones. Both valuable, but the future belongs to innovators." The final entry was dated just 2 weeks before his death. "Meeting with Walter tomorrow to finalize changes to my will. I know this decision will initially devastate R and confuse Eleanor. But leadership of Westridge requires vision for where the profession is heading, not just mastery of where it's been. O sees around corners, anticipates needs before clients themselves recognize them. This is what built Westridge originally, not just technical legal excellence, but strategic foresight. R will consider this a betrayal, but in time I hope she recognizes it as an opportunity to grow beyond the narrow path I mistakenly defined as the only route to success." Tears blurred my vision as I read his final words. "To Olivia, who will find this after I'm gone. I was wrong. Your path wasn't a rejection of my values, but an evolution of them. You saw changes coming that I was too entrenched to recognize. The courage to pursue your vision despite my disapproval reveals a strength of character greater than mere obedience. I regret that pride prevented me from telling you this directly. Know that in my final months, I came to profoundly respect the woman you've become, not despite taking a different path, but because of it." I sat in my father's chair, holding his journal, feeling the complex weight of his posthumous recognition. The validation I had sought for years had been granted, but only after he was gone. A bittersweet gift that closed one chapter while opening another. My phone buzzed with a text from Jade. "NASA contract looking promising. Washington called already with follow-up questions. You okay?" "I'm good," I replied. "Just getting some unexpected closure. See you tomorrow." As I prepared to leave, I noticed a small model on my father's desk I'd never paid attention to before. A satellite with tiny solar panels extended like wings. Attached was a post-it note in his handwriting. "For O's office. A final acknowledgement of our unexpected connection, planned but never delivered." I placed the satellite model carefully in my bag alongside the journal, and took one last look around the office that had symbolized success in my childhood. The space felt different now. not an embodiment of the path I had rejected, but a waypoint in a larger journey my father had finally begun to understand. The following Monday, I arrived at Westridge for the first executive committee meeting under the new governance structure. The weekend had given me time to process the journal's revelations and develop a clearer vision for integrating my dual responsibilities. The committee consisted of Rebecca, Walter, 2 senior partners, and myself as chairperson. We gathered in a smaller conference room rather than the imposing main boardroom, a deliberate choice to establish a more collaborative atmosphere. Thank you all for joining this inaugural meeting, I began. Today we'll establish our working protocols and priorities for the next quarter. But first, I'd like to share some thoughts on Westridge's positioning in a rapidly evolving legal landscape. I outline my vision for expanding the firm's expertise in emerging fields, not abandoning traditional corporate law, but evolving alongside changing client needs. I proposed establishing 3 new practice groups: renewable energy law, sustainable business compliance, and technology innovation protection. These aren't separate from our core business, I emphasized. They're natural extensions that position us ahead of market demands. Major corporations, including many of our existing clients, are already shifting towards sustainable practices, renewable energy integration, and technology-driven operations. Westridge should be leading that transition, not reacting to it. Rebecca, to my surprise, nodded. I've been hearing these concerns from clients increasingly over the past year. Barnes Technology specifically asked about our expertise in clean energy compliance last month. We had to bring in outside counsel. One of the senior partners, James Whitfield, leaned forward. My team has been tracking similar requests. There's growing demand, but we've been hesitant to invest in new specialties without clear direction from leadership. Consider this that direction, I said. I propose allocating resources to develop these practice areas immediately, including targeted hiring and professional development for existing attorneys interested in transitioning. The discussion that followed was energetic and productive. Rebecca, while still formal, contributed valuable insights about client needs and internal capabilities. By meeting's end, we had established concrete next steps and assigned responsibilities for implementation. As the others filed out, Rebecca lingered behind. "The satellite model," she said, nodding toward the small object I'd placed on my desk. "Dad got that at a space law conference last year." He kept looking at it oddly. "I found it in his office," I said. "He'd left it for me, apparently." She was quiet for a moment. "He changed in those final months. Started asking me questions about sustainability regulations, reviewing articles about renewable energy. I thought it was just idle curiosity." She straightened a stack of papers, not meeting my eyes. "I still think I should be leading Westridge, but I'm beginning to understand why he thought you might see things I wouldn't." It wasn't an apology or acceptance, but it was an acknowledgement. Perhaps the most I could expect given our history. "We see different things," I agreed. "That's why we're stronger working together than competing." She nodded curtly and left, maintaining her professional distance while opening the door to a new kind of relationship. Not warm, perhaps never close, but potentially respectful in a way that hadn't seemed possible before. Later that day, I visited Phoenix's headquarters to review progress on the NASA modifications. The energy in our offices contrasted sharply with Westridge's measured professionalism. Open workspaces humming with activity, prototype materials being tested in glass-walled labs, engineers and designers collaborating around digital models. Jade found me observing the main engineering floor from the mezzanine. "How was your first official day as law firm boss?" "Surprisingly productive," I admitted. "There's potential there for meaningful evolution if we can overcome institutional inertia." "And Rebecca?" "Professional. Not friendly, but not actively hostile." I smiled. "Baby steps." She nodded toward the prototype lab. "We've already incorporated NASA's feedback into the radiation shielding design. The team's been working through the weekend." "That's what I love about Phoenix," I said. "The energy, the willingness to iterate rapidly, the shared vision of building something that matters." "Speaking of which," Jade said, "I've been thinking about your dual role situation." What if instead of just having Westridge develop expertise in clean energy law, we created a more integrated approach? A joint venture between Phoenix and Westridge focused on legal and regulatory frameworks for emerging sustainable technologies. The suggestion sparked immediate possibilities in my mind. A think tank that combines legal expertise with technical innovation, I elaborated. Developing policy recommendations, regulatory frameworks, compliance systems. Exactly, Jade nodded enthusiastically. Neither Phoenix nor Westridge could do it alone, but together, we could help shape how these technologies are implemented and regulated. Not just building the future, but helping create the systems that enable it to flourish. The idea crystallized something I'd been sensing since reading my father's journal, that the apparent conflict between our paths had actually been an artificial division. Innovation and institutional expertise, technical vision and regulatory framework, entrepreneurial spirit and established structure. These weren't opposing forces, but complementary strengths. The Richard Parker Institute for Sustainable Innovation Law, I said, the name forming spontaneously. A bridge between the world he built and the one we're creating. That evening, I brought the satellite model to my mother's house for dinner, our second meal together since the funeral, now becoming a weekly tradition. She examined it curiously as I explained where I'd found it. He ordered it specially, she said. I remember because it wasn't like his usual office decorations. When I asked about it, he said it represented, quote, different perspectives on the same principles. She smiled slightly. I didn't understand what he meant then. I think I do now, I said, telling her about the journal and my idea for the institute bridging Phoenix and Westridge. She listened thoughtfully, then said, you know, he and I had our first real argument in decades after he visited your company. He came home talking about paradigm shifts and disruptive innovation. I told him he was being ridiculous to suddenly act like he understood your world after dismissing it for years. This surprised me. I had always seen my mother as completely deferential to my father's opinions. What did he say? I asked. He said, Eleanor, I've been wrong. Our daughter isn't rejecting our values, she's evolving them for a world we barely understand. It was the first time I'd heard him admit being wrong about anything significant. She reached for my hand. I think he'd be very proud of how you're handling everything now, honoring his legacy while transforming it into something new. As I drove home that night, I reflected on the unexpected journey of the past weeks. I had arrived at my father's funeral as the family disappointment, seated in the back row while others celebrated his life. I was navigating the aftermath as the bridge between traditions and innovation, finding unexpected value in both worlds. The back row had given me perspective that those in the front could never have, the ability to see patterns, connections, and possibilities invisible from the center of established systems. Being the family disappointment had forced me to develop resilience, vision, and the courage to chart my own course. And now, that unique perspective was precisely what both Westridge and Phoenix needed, not just to survive, but to thrive in a rapidly changing landscape. Sometimes I realized what looks like rejection is actually redirection toward a more meaningful path. Sometimes the greatest gift we can receive is the freedom to disappoint others' expectations and discover our authentic purpose. And sometimes the very qualities that make us outsiders in one context make us visionaries in another. As Seattle's lights glittered beneath a rare, clear night sky, I made a silent promise to my father. I would build something meaningful from the unexpected inheritance, not just managing his legacy, but transforming it into something neither of us could have created alone. A bridge between worlds that would honor both our journeys. 6 months after my father's funeral, I stood in the newly renovated conference center of Westridge Partners, watching as staff made final preparations for the official launch of the Richard Parker Institute for Sustainable Innovation Law. The space had been transformed from a traditional law firm meeting room to a modern collaborative environment. Glass walls, flexible seating arrangements, and state-of-the-art technology integrations that reflected the Institute's boundary-crossing mission. The governor confirmed she'll speak at the opening, Walter said, approaching with a tablet displaying the final agenda. And the EPA regional director will join the first panel discussion. I nodded, surveying the room with satisfaction. Any word from Rebecca? She'll be here, Walter assured me. She's been personally briefing key clients about the Institute all week. This small detail revealed how much had shifted in 6 months. Rebecca hadn't embraced me as a sister, but she had grudgingly come to respect me as a business leader. Her initial resistance to the Institute had gradually transformed into strategic engagement as she recognized its potential value to Westridge's positioning. The Institute represented everything I had envisioned, a true bridge between Phoenix's technological innovation and Westridge's legal expertise. We had assembled a team of environmental lawyers, policy experts, and clean technology specialists, working alongside engineers and scientists, to develop frameworks for implementing sustainable technologies at scale. The goal wasn't just developing new legal specialties, but actively shaping how emerging technologies would be regulated, deployed, and integrated into existing systems. Ms. Parker, the press is starting to arrive, an assistant informed me. And your mother just called to say she's 10 minutes away. I thanked her and took a moment to center myself before the public unveiling of what had become my most meaningful project. The journey to this point had been intense. Months of 18-hour days split between Phoenix's expanding operations and Westridge's transformation, countless presentations to skeptical stakeholders, delicate negotiations between teams with different professional cultures and priorities. But the results had exceeded even my optimistic projections. Phoenix had secured the NASA contract, positioning us as a key player in space habitat technology. Our Earth-based applications continued to expand, with major implementations now underway in 3 countries. Westridge had successfully established its new practice areas, attracting both fresh talent and new clients drawn to the firm's forward-thinking approach. Most surprising was the evolution in my family relationships. Mom had become increasingly engaged with my work, regularly touring Phoenix's facilities and even offering insightful suggestions about communicating our technology to non-technical audiences. Rebecca maintained professional distance but had proven a surprisingly effective partner in establishing the Institute, leveraging her extensive network and reputation to secure critical support. The launch event filled quickly with an eclectic mix of attendees: legal professionals in conservative suits, mingling with tech entrepreneurs in casual attire, government officials alongside environmental activists, venture capitalists engaging with academic researchers. This diverse convergence was exactly what I had envisioned, breaking down silos between sectors that needed to collaborate to address complex sustainability challenges. I spotted Mom entering, elegantly dressed but noticeably more relaxed than she would have been at similar events during my father's lifetime. She had evolved in these months, rediscovering interests and perspectives long subordinated to her role as the perfect corporate wife. She had recently joined the board of a women's leadership organization and enrolled in environmental policy courses at the university, small steps toward defining her own identity. "This is impressive, Olivia," she said, embracing me warmly. "Your father would be proud to see his name associated with such innovative work." "Thanks, Mom." "That means a lot." Rebecca arrived moments later, impeccably professional in a tailored suit, acknowledging me with a reserved nod before smoothly engaging a group of corporate clients. Our relationship remained complicated. Not close, but no longer actively adversarial. We had established a functional working dynamic based on mutual respect for each other's different strengths. As the event formally began, I took my place at the podium, surveying the gathered audience. Representatives from worlds that rarely intersected meaningfully, now brought together under one roof. "Welcome to the inaugural symposium of the Richard Parker Institute for Sustainable Innovation Law," I began. This institute was born from a recognition that the greatest challenges of our time cannot be solved in isolation. Legal frameworks without technological understanding create barriers to innovation. Technological advancement without legal guidance risks unintended consequences and regulatory backlash. True progress requires integration of diverse perspectives. I paused, making eye contact with faces throughout the room. My father built his career on understanding how legal structures shape business realities. For most of his life, he applied that understanding within established systems. In his final months, he began to recognize that those systems themselves are evolving. requiring not just adaptation but fundamental reimagining. I gestured toward the Institute's mission statement displayed on the wall, bridging innovation and regulation to create sustainable futures. This institute honors my father's legacy not by preserving the past, but by evolving it to meet future challenges. We will develop legal frameworks that accelerate rather than impede sustainable innovation. We will help technologists understand regulatory realities, so their innovations can achieve widest possible implementation. And we will work with policymakers to create governance structures that protect public interests while enabling transformative solutions. The governor spoke next, highlighting the economic and environmental benefits of positioning our region as a hub for clean technology development and implementation. A panel discussion followed, featuring experts debating approaches to balancing innovation and regulation in emerging fields. Throughout the day, I moved between conversations, connecting people from different sectors who might never have encountered each other in their normal professional circles. A Phoenix engineer explaining our solar film technology to a senior EPA official. A Westridge attorney discussing compliance challenges with a clean energy startup founder. A policy researcher exchanging ideas with a venture capitalist about incentive structures for sustainable innovation. These cross-boundary connections represented the Institute's core purpose, creating a space where different perspectives could collide productively, generating insights impossible within isolated specialties. Near the event's conclusion, I spotted Rebecca engaged in what appeared to be an intense conversation with Dr. Washington from NASA. Curious, I approached them. Olivia, Dr. Washington greeted me warmly. Your sister has been sharing fascinating insights about regulatory hurdles for implementing new technologies in space applications. I had no idea about the jurisdictional complexities involved. Rebecca nodded professionally. Dr. Washington has been explaining the technical constraints that make standard Earth-based regulations impractical for space habitats. We're discussing how the Institute might develop specialized frameworks that address both technical realities and legal requirements. I concealed my surprise at Rebecca's genuine engagement with the Institute's mission. That's exactly the kind of cross-disciplinary conversation we hope to foster here. Your sister mentioned you're considering expanding the Phoenix-NASA partnership to include habitat governance structures, Dr. Washington said. I'd be interested in contributing to that research stream. We'd welcome your expertise, I replied, noting how Rebecca had apparently been promoting Institute initiatives I hadn't even discussed with her yet. As Dr. Washington moved on to another conversation, I turned to Rebecca. Thank you for engaging so substantively with our NASA connections. I know this isn't the path you originally envisioned for Westridge. She adjusted her perfectly tailored sleeve. I still think Dad made an impulsive decision, she said bluntly. But I've spent 6 months observing how you operate. You're not trying to dismantle what he built, you're expanding it in directions that make strategic sense. She met my eyes directly. I wouldn't have seen these opportunities. That doesn't mean I like admitting it. Coming from Rebecca, this qualified as a profound concession. We see different things, I acknowledged. That's why we're stronger working together than in opposition. She nodded curtly and moved away to engage another client, maintaining her professional boundaries while acknowledging our newfound equilibrium. The event concluded with the formal ribbon cutting, symbolically opening the Institute's collaborative workspace. Mom stood on one side of me, Rebecca on the other. Our family publicly united despite the private complexities of our relationships. As cameras flashed, I reflected on how far we had come from that funeral 6 months earlier, when I had been seated in the back row while they occupied the front. Later that evening, after the guests had departed, I found myself alone in the Institute's main space, absorbing the quiet after the day's energy. The wall of windows offered a panoramic view of Seattle's skyline against the deepening dusk, lights beginning to twinkle in office buildings and homes across the city. You did well today. I turned to find Walter in the doorway, his familiar presence a connection to my father in this transformed space. Thank you, I said. For everything. Not just today, but these past months. I couldn't have navigated this transition without your guidance. He smiled. I've merely provided context. You've charted the course entirely on your own. He crossed to stand beside me at the windows. Richard would be astonished by what you've accomplished in 6 months. not just maintaining his firm but evolving it into something more relevant and impactful. I hope so, I said softly. I know so, Walter replied. In 30 years working with your father, I never saw him admit being wrong about anything significant. The fact that he not only recognized his error in judgment regarding your capabilities, but actively restructured his legacy around that recognition speaks volumes. He reached into his jacket and withdrew an envelope. This arrived at my office last week. I've been waiting for the right moment to give it to you. I accepted the envelope, noting the NASA logo in the corner. Inside was a formal letter confirming that Phoenix's solar film technology had been selected for implementation in the next generation of space habitats, with an expanded scope beyond our original proposal. The accompanying note from Dr. Washington referenced our discussions at the Institute launch, proposing a parallel research initiative on governance frameworks for sustainable space communities. This is exactly what we envisioned for the Institute, I said, showing Walter the letter. Technology implementation and governance structures developing in tandem rather than in isolation. He nodded. Your father specialized in seeing connections between seemingly separate domains, how financial regulations affected technology development, how corporate structures influenced innovation potential. You've inherited that ability but applied it to building bridges he never envisioned. As Walter left me with my thoughts, I considered how profoundly my perspective had shifted in these months. The inheritance that had initially seemed like vindication, proof that I had been right and my family wrong, had evolved into something more nuanced and valuable. It wasn't about who was right, but about integrating different types of rightness into something greater than either could be alone. The next morning, I met Mom for our now regular Saturday breakfast at a small cafe near her home. These weekly conversations had become an unexpected source of connection as we both navigated our changing identities. Me as the bridge between innovation and institution, her as a woman rediscovering independence after decades of defining herself through my father's expectations. The event was remarkable, she said, as we settled at our favorite corner table. To see so many different types of people engaging meaningfully, Richard would never have attempted something so boundary-crossing. I think he was beginning to see the value in it, I replied, telling her about Walter's observations. She considered this. Perhaps. Your father was evolving in those final months, questioning assumptions he'd held for decades. But the Institute itself, that vision of integration rather than separation, that's purely you, Olivia. She stirred her tea thoughtfully. I've been thinking about what made Richard change his perspective so dramatically at the end. It wasn't just recognizing your business success. He had successful colleagues and competitors all his career without fundamentally questioning his worldview. What was it then? I asked. I think it was seeing that you had built something meaningful in a way he hadn't imagined was possible, she said. His path, our path, was always about succeeding within established systems. Your path showed him that sometimes the greatest impact comes from reimagining the systems themselves. Her insight resonated deeply. Dad had spent his career helping clients navigate existing structures. I had focused on creating new structures to address emerging needs. His expertise had been valuable but confined by assumptions about how the world worked. Mine challenged those assumptions while building on his foundational understanding. I've been offered a position on the board of the Women's Leadership Coalition, Mom said, changing subjects with a hint of nervousness. I'm considering accepting it. That's fantastic, I said sincerely. Your experience navigating corporate environments would be invaluable to their mission. Richard would have discouraged it, she admitted. He believed board service should focus on professional advancement or social prestige, not social change. She smiled slightly. But watching you these past months, seeing how you've integrated purpose with practice, has made me reconsider what meaningful contribution looks like at this stage of my life. Her words highlighted another dimension of the inheritance beyond the material assets or professional control, the permission to reimagine success differently than previous generations had defined it. After breakfast, I headed to Phoenix's headquarters for our weekly leadership meeting. The company had grown dramatically in the past 6 months, expanding to over 500 employees with operations in 7 countries. The NASA contract had elevated our profile, attracting top talent and opening doors to partnerships that would have been unimaginable a year earlier. Jade met me in the lobby, tablet in hand as always. The prototype for the next-generation film passed final testing yesterday, she reported, as we walked toward the conference room. Efficiency increased 18% beyond projections. That's extraordinary, I said. Has Marcus identified what accounted for the improvement? That's the interesting part, she replied. It was something Rebecca suggested during a site visit last month, adjusting the molecular structure based on a pattern she recognized from a pharmaceutical case she worked on. Completely different field, but the underlying principle translated perfectly. I stopped walking, surprised. Rebecca visited the lab? Voluntarily? Jade grinned. Shocked me too. She said she was, quote, conducting due diligence on Westridge's investment in the institute, but she asked thoughtful questions and actually engaged with the technical team. This development was unexpected, but aligned with subtle shifts I'd observed in Rebecca's approach. Her initial rigid opposition had gradually given way to pragmatic engagement as she recognized potential professional advantages in understanding Phoenix's work. It wasn't sisterly warmth, but it was a form of respect I wouldn't have thought possible 6 months earlier. The leadership meeting focused on scaling challenges, how to maintain our innovative culture while growing rapidly, how to balance immediate market opportunities with long-term research investments, how to integrate new team members without diluting our core values. These were good problems to have, but they required thoughtful navigation to avoid the pitfalls that had derailed other promising companies during expansion phases. We need to consciously cultivate cross-functional understanding, I emphasized. Our advantage comes from integration. Engineers who understand market realities, business strategists who appreciate technical constraints, everyone aligned around our core mission of making sustainable technology accessible and impactful. As I spoke, I realized I was applying lessons from both worlds I now inhabited, Phoenix's innovative spirit and Westridge's institutional wisdom. The former pushed boundaries and challenged assumptions. The latter provided structures and processes for translating vision into sustainable reality. Each had limitations alone. Together, they created a more resilient approach. After the meeting, I received an unexpected call from Rebecca. "Are you available to meet this afternoon?" she asked without preamble. "There's a situation developing with the Arrington account that intersects with the Institute's work. We arranged to meet at a neutral location, a private room at the downtown library rather than either of our offices." When I arrived, Rebecca was already there, documents spread across the table in her characteristically organized fashion. Arrington Enterprises is developing a carbon capture technology that could significantly complement Phoenix's energy solutions, she began without preamble. They're a long-standing Westridge client, but they've been approached by Tech Solutions Group with a potential acquisition offer. I knew Tech Solutions Group well. They were Phoenix's largest competitor and had attempted to block our NASA contract through aggressive lobbying. If TSG acquires Arrington, they'll likely shelve the carbon capture technology to protect their fossil fuel investments, Rebecca continued. Alternatively, they might weaponize the patents to block complementary technologies like Phoenix's. "Why are you bringing this to me?" I asked carefully. She met my eyes directly. "Because there's a third option that would better serve both Arrington's interests and broader sustainability goals. Phoenix could partner with Arrington, providing the implementation infrastructure their technology currently lacks. Westridge could structure the legal framework. The Institute could develop policy recommendations to incentivize deployment." I studied her with newfound appreciation. 6 months ago, Rebecca would have viewed Phoenix and Westridge as entirely separate domains. Now she was identifying strategic integration opportunities I hadn't seen. "That's actually brilliant," I acknowledged. "An integrated approach that creates more value than any single company solution." "It's just good business," she said dismissively, but I detected a hint of satisfaction at my recognition. Arrington's CEO is open to discussions. I've prepared a preliminary framework for how the partnership might function. As she outlined the proposal, I realized we were witnessing the emergence of something my father hadn't anticipated. Not just my leadership of his firm or Rebecca's grudging acceptance of my role, but a genuine synthesis of our different perspectives, creating possibilities neither of us would have identified alone. 2 weeks later, we announced the Phoenix-Arrington Strategic Partnership at a press conference held at the Institute. The collaboration represented everything the Institute stood for: technology and policy advancing together, corporate interests aligned with sustainability goals, innovation strengthened by thoughtful legal frameworks. As cameras flashed and reporters asked questions, I stood alongside Arrington's CEO, with Rebecca positioned nearby as the partnership's legal architect. Mom watched from the audience, her expression reflecting pride that encompassed both her daughter's contributions. Later that evening, I returned to the Institute alone, seeking a quiet moment to absorb the day's significance. The space was peaceful after hours, the wall of windows now reflecting the twinkling city lights against the darkened glass. I placed my father's satellite model on the windowsill, a silent witness to the journey that had brought me here. From family disappointment to unexpected heir. From back row to center stage. From outsider to integrator. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.